Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is w.b.t with the metric number 1916292. So, me and my group members from Group 5 will be presenting the analysis of inflation and cost of living. So, here is our subpoint for our topics, starting from introduction, continued by the difference between inflation and cost of living. And the second is comparative inflation trends among countries. The third is causes for inflation or hyperinflation. The fourth is impact of inflation towards people. And the last one is how CPI is computed with examples from few IOC countries. And I will conclude this presentation with the last. Okay, we move to the introduction. I will give a brief explanation about the inflation and also the types of inflation. So, what does actually means by inflation? Inflation is an environment of generally rising prices of goods and services within a particular economy. Basically, the rising of price level of goods and services, and these result to the declining of consumers' purchasing power, where consumers can only buy a fewer products compared to before with their income. For example, in 1930, a gallon of milk cost about 36 cents, only 36 cents per gallon. But 100 years later, which means in 2030, a gallon of milk costs $3.53, and it is shown that after 100 years later, the price of a gallon of milk increased up to 10 times higher than before. And inflation also were measured over time, and it's been called as a inflation rate. For the types of inflation, inflation actually have two types, which are demand pull inflation and cost pull inflation. But the demand pull inflation is actually a situation where too much money has been produced, has been made, and this give a result as the increase in aggregate demand for certain goods and services, because people possessed a lot of money, and possessing a lot of money actually increasing people demands toward goods and services. And it's actually the demand pull inflation is a result when the economy's aggregate demand exceeds the aggregate supply. In a simply way to understand that the product um, cannot keep up with the demand of the consumer, so the higher price is quickly followed. For the cost pull inflation, it is a situation where the decrease in aggregate supply of certain goods and services, because of the increment of cost of production. For example, like the price of raw material increase, the wages of the labor increase because of the reducing number of labor, which leads to the higher wages should be paid by the manufacturer, and maybe also the higher rental factory uh, for the factory itself. And all of these cost of production has to paid by the manufacturer, and this actually increase the price of the product itself, which is the output, and the price is largely increased. So here is a graph of Malaysia inflation rate, where we can see from the graph that Malaysia inflation rate is fluctuates, and from the graph also you can see that Malaysia hit the highest inflation rate in 2008, and inflation hit 3% in April 2008, with the food and beverage prices rising up to 5.7% in the same period. And inflation is rising globally as the cost of all food and construction materials have soared, partly on the back of the growth of larger emerging markets like Malaysia's. And besides the direct effect of rapid increase in staple fuels, the increases are likely to feed through into inflation indirectly, though higher transport costs for goods.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Tasnim Musa. Today I'm going to be saying about the difference between inflation and cost of living. Inflation is the general rising price level in the economy, and reduction in purchasing power in the main fundamental of inflation. Although inflation is generally known for the negative impact and positive impact in our economy. There are two types of inflation, which are price inflation, mean a rise in the consumer good, and rate inflation mean loss in purchasing power parity. Next is about the negative effect. The negative effect is the opportunity cost related with hoarding money increase, and this discouragement of saving and investment because of uncertainty over future inflation, and also for the shortage of consumer goods and services, which encourage hoarding. And next is the positive impact is to decrease in employment as a result of nominal with rigidity, and also to avoid inefficiencies is to related with deflation, and also to encourage investment and loans are different from the money hoarding. And the last about the consumer price index, or CPI, is utilized to quantify inflation through a normal of a basket of products including medical care, transportation, and food. Next is about the cost of living. The cost of living refers to the cost of maintaining a standard of living, such as food, transportation, housing, and so on. And also the cost of living is different in variant of location in the world. Some places having low cost, and while other places have high cost of living. Next is about measurement the cost of living. There are two types. First is cost of living index. Cost of living index is used to measure the relative cost of living from time to time within the country. And cost of living index, the first public was in 1968. It considered the price of goods and service and allow substitute with different items. And cost of living index calculated by taking into consideration of another region cost of living as a base. And second, about purchasing power of parity. Purchasing power of parity is another method to measure the standard of living. Is to use the currencies in different way. It is an economic theory which measures the exchange rate between two currencies to the relation of currencies respective purchasing power. The relative cost of living differ among countries who use different currencies. It is a complex method of calculating cost of living. Last part is the different characteristics between cost of living and inflation. First is definition. For the cost of living is used to measure the relative cost of living from time to time, while inflation is an increase the price of goods and service and economy. And for the tool of measure for the cost of living, use standard purchasing power of parity, while inflation is using consumer price index. For boundaries, for the cost of living, it affects to the mobility of resource, while inflation is a macroeconomic condition and affect the whole economy. Last about economy effect. For cost of living is calculated for city, state, country, whereas for inflation, it calculates for each country. That's all for me. Thank you.
Highest and lowest inflation rate around the world in 2018. From the diagram, we can see three countries with the highest inflation rate, which is Iran at 29.9%, Turkey 16.3%, and Nigeria 12.1%. At the highest inflation rate, Iran, Turkey, and Nigeria are putting a strain on citizens and businesses with effects ranging from exorbitant food prices, rising rents, and falling sales on non-necessary items. And from the diagram also we can see another three countries with a very low inflation rate, where at below 1%, which is Singapore, Ireland, and Japan. At a very low inflation, it will encourage consumers to make purchases, and it can lead to less earnings for companies and decreased hiring. It also leads prices into downward spiral, causing deflation and deterioration of prices equally. Countries with the highest rates of inflation in 2019. These are the countries that having the highest rates of inflation. We have Venezuela at 282,972.80%, Zimbabwe 175.66%, South Sudan 56.10%, Argentina 55.80%, Iran 50.40%, Sudan 47.80%, Liberia 23.30%, Haiti 18%, Sierra Leone 17.46%, and Angola 16.94%. And from the diagram, as we can see, Venezuela are having a very high inflation rate at that time, and it was hobbled by political and economic instability at that year. While in Zimbabwe, they are having a problems where prices are increasing amid scarcity of essentials including bread, food, and medicine. And now we go to inflation trend in Malaysia for March 2020. As we can see from the infographic, CPI March 2020 fell 0.2%. The inflation rate for March 2020 fell by 1.2% due to transports and restaurants and hotels. The transport fell by negative 8.9%, while restaurants and hotels fell by negative 0.2%. The decline in transportation because of fuel costs fell. As we know, at that time, the prices of oil fell at a very lower prices. As we can see, for RON 19.5, it fell from 2 ringgit and 8 cents to 1 ringgit and 74 cents. And RON 19.7 fell from 2 ringgit 51 cents to 2 ringgit and 4 cents.
Assalamualaikum, I'm Jaman. I'm going to present about the causes of inflation or hyperinflation. There are various factors that can drive prices or inflation in economy. The two main causes of inflation are demand pull or cost push. Both are responsible for general rise in price in economy. The demand pull inflation is the most common cause of rising prices. It occurs when consumer demand for goods and services increases so much that it outstrips supply. The main causes of demand inflation are a depreciation of exchange rate increases the price of imports and reduce the foreign price of a country exports. If a consumer buy fewer imports while exports grow, the aggregate demand will rise and there may be a multiplier effect on the level of demand and output. The second is higher demand from the fiscal stimulus. Lower direct and indirect taxes or higher government spending. Indirect taxes are reduced and consumers have more disposable income, causing demand to rise. Higher government spending and increased borrowing creates extra demand in the circular flow. And the third one is a fall in interest rate may stimulate too much demand. For example, in rising demand for loan or in leading to house price inflation. Monetarist economists believe that inflation caused by too much money chasing too few goods, and that government can lose control of inflation if they allow the financial system to expend the money supply too quickly. And the last one is marketing and new technology create demand pull inflation for specific product or asset classes. The asset inflation that results can drive widespread price increases. Asset and wage inflation are types of inflation. For example, Apple uses branding to create demand for its product that allow it to command higher prices than the competition. The new technology also occurred in the form of financial derivatives. The second cause is cost push inflation. It occurs when price increase due to the increases in production costs such as raw materials and wages. There are many reasons why cost might rise. Where are number one, component cost. An increase in the price of raw materials and other components. This might be because of rise in commodity prices such as oil, copper, and agricultural products used in food processing. Number two is rising labor cost caused by wage increases which are greater than improvement in productivity. Wage costs often rise when unemployment is low because skilled workers become scarce, and this can drive pay levels higher. Wage might increase when people expect higher inflation, so they ask for more pay in order to protect their real incomes. Trade unions may use their bargaining power to bid for and achieve increasing wages. This could be a cause of cost push inflation. Third one is expectation of inflation are important in shaping what actually happens to inflation. When people see prices are rising for everyday items, that they get concerned about the effect of inflation on their real standard of living. Fourth is the higher indirect taxes. For example, a rise in the duty on alcohol, fuels, and cigarettes, or rise in the value-added tax. Depending on the price elasticity of demand and supply for their products, suppliers may choose to pass on the burden of the tax onto consumers. Fifth is a fall in the exchange rate can cause cost push inflation because it leads to an increase in the prices of important products such as essential raw materials, components, and finished products. 6. Monopoly employers or profit push inflation, where dominant firms in a market use their market power as whatever level of demand to increase prices well above the cost. And the last one is natural disaster also drive prices higher. It creates temporary cost push inflation by damaging production facilities. The depletion of natural resources is growing cause of cost push inflation. For example, if hurricane destroys a crop such as corn, prices can rise across the economy since corn is used in many products. Too much money is at the root of most hyperinflation occurrence. Hyperinflation can be triggered by a number of reasons. The most common causes of hyperinflation are excessive money supply. If the increase in money supply is not supported by economic growth as measured by gross domestic product, the result can lead to the hyperinflation. If GDP, which is a measure of production of goods and services in an economy, isn't growing, businesses raises price to boost profits and stay afloat. Since consumers have more money, they pay the higher prices, which leads to the inflation. As economy deteriorates further, companies change more and consumers pay more, and the central bank prints more money, leading to the victorious cycle of hyperinflation. The second is loss of confidence in economy or monetary system. In the times of war, hyperinflation often occurs when this is the loss of confidence in a country, currency, and the central bank ability to maintain its currency's value in the aftermath. If a government isn't managed properly, citizens can also lose confidence in the value of their country's currency. When the currency is perceived as having little or no value, people begin to hoard commodities and goods that have value. As prices begin to rise, basic goods such as food and fuel become scarce, and sending prices in an upward spiral. In response, the government is forced to print even more money to try stabilize prices and provide liquidity, which only exacerbate the problem. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Kulwani Artman. I'm going to present the impact of inflation on the people. So, inflation is described because of the erosion in purchasing capability consistent with the unit of currency, which means that every dollar can purchase few items and for offering than it could before. It sparked a surge of the result through economy. Inflation has a diversity of effects. The effects of that can differ from person to person, debtor and creditor. During the period of rising costs, debtor gain and creditor loss. Once the price rise, the burden of cash falls. Although the debtor return constant quantity of money, however, they pay less in terms of products and service. This can be because of the value of money in the smaller amount than after they borrow the money. Therefore, the burden of the debt is reduced, and the debtor gain. On the other hand, creditor loss, even though they get back in the same amount of money that they lend, they receive less in the real income because of the value the money fall. Therefore, inflation bring a couple of distribution of the real income in favor of debtor in the price of creditor. Salary person, wage earners. Salary employees similar to clerks, teacher, alternative professional person, lawyers. Once there is the inflation, the explanation is that their salary are slow to regulate when the costs are rising. Wage earner may gain or lose relying on the speed with that they wage comply with rising prices. In their union are strong, they will get their wage connected to the cost of living index. During this way, they may be able to shield themselves from the dangerous effect of inflation. Saving, especially the ones saved in cash, lost price every year on the charge of inflation. This, consistent with many economics, absolutely advantage the economic system in the large. Inflation admonishes savers and encourages spending and investment, pushing people far from the holding cash and into extra efficient uses in their capital. Even a financial saving account at bank generally could have interest rate that reflect the inflation charge to a few degrees. That cash is going to efficient use. Fixed income group. The recipient of transfer payments such as the pensions, employment insurance, social security, and so on. The recipient of interest and live on constant earning. Pensioners get constant pensions. Similarly, the renter class including interest and rent receiver get constant payment. Constant is that the case with the holder of constant interest-bearing securities, abandoners, and deposits. Everyone will lose because they obtain constant payment, whereas the world of cash maintain the fall with growing prices. Inflation impact people in another way, relying on how they earn their living, investment primarily based on total profit. Equity holders and investors and businessmen. Person who maintain stock or shares of organization benefit at some point of inflation. For while prices are rising, commercial enterprise activity increase, which boosts the income of organization. As income grow, dividend on equities additional grow in the quicker charge than cost. But people who spend money on the debenture, securities, bonds, and so on, which bring the fixed interest charge, lost the sum point of inflation due to the fact they acquire a fixed sum at the same time as a buying power is falling. Agriculturists, landlords lost throughout inflation. As a result, they get fixed rent. However, present proprietors who own or cultivate their farm gains. Cost of farm merchandise increase over the price of production. For the price of inputs, they and land revenue do not rise in the same extent because the rise within the price of the farm products. However, the cost of consumer goods rise rapidly, therefore landless agricultural workers are losers at the expense of the household who are in the principal creditor. This can be a result of interest rates on government bonds are fixed and are not raised to offset the expected rise in prices. The government in turn levies taxes to service and retire its debt. With inflation, even the real world of taxes is reduced, so distribution of wealth in favor of the government occurs as a profit to taxpayers. Since the taxpayers of the government are high-income groups, they are additionally the creditor of the government because it is they who hold government bonds. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. Myself Abdullah Al-Noman. Today I am going to talk about what is the CPI and how to calculate it CPI and how to calculate it computed CPI with examples from few YC countries. Actually, at first I am going to talk what is the CPI. The CPI is a statistical measures calculated by the Labor Statistics Bureau. It's called BLS. It is one of the economic figures which is most often mentioned and is commonly used as an inflation proxy. As an indication of where the economy is headed, investors pay careful attention to CPI, which impacts price forecasts for inflation-sensitive assets like bonds and commodities. CPI is also used a barometer of overall economic health and among the general public, with most observers choosing low to moderate CPI in the 2 to 3% range. Next is how the consumer price index CPI calculated. The weighted average price of a large cross section of goods and service is CPI. The purpose of the set of objects often referred to as the baskets of goods by the CPI. It is approximately the typical products and services purchased by American consumers. As the price of such products increase because of inflation over the years, the continuous rise is expressed is a rising CPI. In the media, in terms of its percentages shift year over years, CPI widely referred. We know CPI formula. CPI formula equal to cost of the market basket in given year divided by cost of the market basket base year into 100%. And another one, the CPI inflation rate is inflation rate in year 2 equal to CPI in year 2 minus CPI in year 1 divided by CPI in year 1 into 100. Now I am going to show one example. Base year is 2002. Basket of goods in 2002 cost is $1,200. The same basket in 2004 cost is $1,236. So CPI equal to $1,236 divided by $1,200 into 100 is equal to 103. Price increased 3% between 2002 and 2004. Next is there are two types of CPI are reported each time, the CPI-W and the CPI-U. What is the meaning of CPI-W? CPI-W mainly represent improvement in the cost of social security insurance paid to those receiving benefits. The measurement of CPI represent at least 28% of the country's population. Another is the CPI-U. Urban consumers price index accounts for 88% of the US population. In 1978, the BLS made CPI changed and created a wider target population. Next, I put example of consumer price index in Afghanistan September 2020. I mentioned on slide a graph. For the indicator, we provide data for Afghanistan from November 2015 to September 2020. The average value of Afghanistan during that period was 111.96 index point with a minimum of 104. One index point in February 2016 and a maximum of 124.9.1 index point in April 2020. Next, CPI computed example of OIC such as Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia inflation, a percentage change in the consumer price index. For that indicator, we provide data for Saudi Arabia from 1964 to 2019. The average value for Saudi Arabia during that period was 3.5% with a minimum of 3.2% in 1986 and a maximum of 34.6% in 1975. The latest value from 2019 is 2.1%. For comparison, the world average in 2019 based on 149 countries is 3.8%. And I showed the Saudi Arabia inflation graph. Now I am going to explain what are the criticism of CPI. Some have argued that the CPI does not reflect the original price differences. Americans living in wealthy areas such as New York City or San Francisco may have considerably different purchasing habits. For example, covers out-of-pocket medical costs. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thus, to conclude this presentation, I would like to provide the pros and cons of inflation. Okay. High inflation has a wide range of negative consequences for economies. When labor wages cannot keep up with the rate of inflation of retail prices, the purchasing power of those wages decrease. For example, the labor only can buy the lesser amount of product, but still with a similar amount of income compared to before. And this is a particular challenge for a low-income family for whom any price increase can have serious consequences. But then, we have to bear in mind that inflation is not always a negative thing. In fact, a stable economy needs to stable level of inflation. Economists understand that while high inflation is a real danger, then low inflation is not good, but low inflation is dangerous as well. I think that's all from me and my group members. Thank you.